All right, there we go. I saw we just went live, right, Monica?
Yeah, so we're live
Perfect.
on whatever you guys want to start.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll get started at least with the intros to let people log on. And I can see there's some people joining on Facebook and stuff too. So I'll get started just by introducing myself and a little bit about Palm Beach Tech. So my name is Nikki Caboose, and I'm the VP of Development with Palm Beach Tech. For anybody that doesn't know, we are a tech nonprofit, started just about 5 years ago. We'll have our birthday in July, our 5th year anniversary in July. And we just actually announced about 3 weeks ago that we are going to be expanding to become a regional organization, which is a big thing for us. And we're really excited about that. And you know, our whole goal and mission is to build South Florida into a tech hub. So working, you know, alongside with our headquartered businesses, you know, our local tech talent here, the colleges, universities, coding schools, just bringing everybody together to help connect the community, to educate them, upskill them, and of course, keep them here. Keep them, you know, happy, finding jobs, you know, and making sure that we can attract visibility from across the country as well, and hopefully bringing more talent and more headquartered companies here. I want to just kind of introduce this career workshop today by saying that we do have our virtual career expo coming up on Wednesday, July 15th. So this is actually the second workshop in the series. We're going to have a different career workshop every Tuesday up until the career expo on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. So Todd, he's in my top left. I don't know where he is for you guys on the screen, but he's actually going to be giving our discussion today on writing a resume for tech. And for anybody that was joined early on here, it was actually, I saw this one on YouTube that he gave a little while ago, and it was actually awesome. So anybody that's here today, you're in for a surprise. It's actually going to be an awesome one compared to a lot of the resume writing classes. But Todd, I want to give you a moment to, you know, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, what you do, and then please feel free to take it away.
Great. And can I share my screen as well?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So let me just see if I can do that. And can you all see that full screen? All right. So hey, as Nikki said, I'm Todd Albert. I come from an academic background, as I was telling Gus a few minutes ago. But in around 2011, switched over to tech, and I've been working in this field exclusively. I've always been in tech my whole life. This is my 4th decade of computer programming. But I just switched full time over to tech about 1 decade ago, and one of the things I've been doing is I've been hiring a lot of people in the tech community, junior developers, mid-level, senior, all different levels, all different positions. So I've read a lot of resumes, I've written a lot of resumes, and I want to utilize what I've learned in that to help you write a resume that's going to actually land you a job interview. I've recently just started a new code school in Boca called Boca Code. We're members of Palm Beach Tech, and wanted to thank Palm Beach Tech for sponsoring this, and also encourage you all to come out and check out Boca Code at bocacode.com. We've got some upcoming workshops and other things. So I'll just jump right in, Nikki, or did you want to say anything else?
Nope, you are good to go.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks. And let's jump right into talking about putting together your resume for tech. I'm going to try and monitor the Zoom chat. But if I'm not seeing anything on Facebook. So if anybody's monitoring that and somebody has a question, please let me know. And also if you're on the Zoom, you have a question, you can, put it in the group chat, or, or just come off mute and interrupt me. Would love to make this more interactive. So please dump your questions.
We'll assist where we can too. Monica, if you can watch some of the social channels, and I'll do the same.
Awesome. So I have about 25 tips here that I'm going to go through, and I'm going to try and go through them really quickly and not take too much of your time. As I mentioned earlier, I'm extremely opinionated about this. I've read many hundreds of resumes. Actually, that's not true. I've looked at many hundreds of resumes. Very few of them I've actually read. And that's one of the key things that you need to take away from this, is that nobody's going to read your resume, right? So don't put a bunch of crap in there. Make it easy to digest, right? And we'll get to that. But the first tip, number one tip, overriding everything else that I can tell you, is this: the goal of your resume is not to get a job. The goal of your resume is to get an interview. You can sell yourself to an employer. You can tell an employer, you can, when you're face to face, you can kind of feel them out and talk them through and engage like what it is that they, you know, that they want, and kind of sell yourself along those lines. That's your job in the interview. But the goal of your resume is to get you that interview. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you answer every single question in your resume, then there's no reason for me to interview you, right? Every question I have for you, oh, it's right here. So feel free to leave out details in your resume, because those are questions I'm going to want answered. And those are reasons why I might want to call you and bring you in and talk to you and say, hey, what, hey, I was intrigued by your resume. I want to talk to you. That's your goal, is to get the interview. So don't think about your resume as a tool to get a job. Think about your resume as a tool to land that conversation. Right? So that's first. The second thing is, I want to go through 10 tips that I call important. Okay. And what do I mean by these? These are kind of, unavoidable, must do, top 10 tips. And this is, number one, make sure you have the correct contact information. I actually, at Boca Code, we get calls a few times a week for Manish, who, somebody's got a job offer for Manish. I don't know who Manish is, but his phone number on his resume is the same as the school's. So we get calls for him every day. And I've had this happen where I found a candidate, they looked really great. I emailed them, said I was interested, never heard back. Sometimes the email bounces. Sometimes I call their phone and it's not the right phone number. So this seems obvious, but make sure you have the correct contact information on your resume. Professional personal email. What do I mean by that? Don't use your former employer's email address, right? So if you're currently working at Office Depot and you're looking for a new job, don't use, Susan at officedepot.com. Use a personal email, but also your personal email should not be like birddog69 at, swashbuckling whatever.com, right? If you want to look like a putz, don't if you don't want to look like a putz, don't do that on your resume. There's free emails from Gmail, Yahoo, whatever. Look professional, first name dot last name at gmail.com, or whatever you can get that's kind of more professional sounding, but is clearly your own personal email address. Also on your resume, I'm going to look at your resume. When I get your resume, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to look at your resume like that. And if I don't see what I want, it's gone. Right. So at the very top, you want to put the most relevant information. The first thing I see should be that thing that's going to say, this person looks interesting. So the most relevant should come first. And, some of these hopefully are very obvious to you, but you would be surprised at how many people don't follow these rules. The second thing is the most recent first. You always put your resume sections in reverse chronological order, right? So your top thing isn't, oh, when I was 7 years old, I wrote my first software program. That's at the bottom, right? That's the least relevant. That's the least recent. What you've done most recently comes at the top. And we'll get to whether that should even be on your resume or not in a minute. But just make sure that your most recent is at the top. Super important, spelling and grammar. Now, I know some people will say, who cares if there's one little spelling mistake or whatever, people are grammar Nazis here's the thing. As a manager, if I see you've made a mistake in your spelling, I assume you're not careful. And do I want to hire somebody who's not careful? Right? So look over, this document is representing you. So if there's carelessness is what's represented, I'm going to assume you're a careless person. And do I want you, a careless person, controlling the code or whatever I'm hiring you for at my company? Obviously not. So have people look over it for you, check it yourself, read it forwards, backwards, etc. Keep it concise. This is actually one of my favorite words in the English language, the word concise, because it packs so much meaning into 7 letters. It's concise means, don't be overly wordy. Concise means get to the point. Concise means don't ramble on like I am right now. Concise means, taking the gist of what you're trying to say and compacting it into as few words or as clear and simple as possible. And that's really it. Clear and simple, right? That's concise and it's beautiful. Make sure your resume is that. Make sure your cover letter is that. Make sure your correspondence are that. Don't ramble on for pages and pages that, oh, ever since I was a little boy or little girl, I've always wanted da 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 da. Right? Oh, what? Keep me awake. I love your company. I want to come work there. Here's why I'd be a good fit. Boom, boom, boom. Right? Easy to read. I got a resume from a friend of mine. She asked me to look it over, and my eyes are doing this, bouncing around. Here's her email. Here's her phone number. Here's her address. Part of her address. The other, and I'm jerking my head around like I'm at a tennis match or something, trying to read her resume. Just keep it easy to read, nice flow, right? Everything's aligned down the left side so I can quickly scan down, see everything I want. And then you can use things like, bold and italics and strategically to make things, separate things visually, make things pop, make their eyes hone in on the key things you want, right? So if you use bold on a couple of places, I look at your resume, my eye's going to go to those bold things. And if those look good, then I might actually read what's in between the bold, right? And finally, of the top 10 important tips, make it a PDF. If you're sending me your resume to edit, send it to me in an editable document. If you're sending me your resume to read, send it to me as a PDF. Make it professional. A PDF is the only way you can be sure that your resume is going to look like on my computer and on my iPad and on my phone and wherever I'm looking at it, that it will look the same way that it looks on that you want it to look, right? So you're going to make your resume look nice. You're going to format it nice. If you save it as a Word document, I don't have Word on my computer. I use a different word processor. So when I open it, it looks different. And you don't know, sometimes it looks just fine, but usually not. But a PDF will always look good and it's way more professional. You're not sending me, something written on the back of, I feel like you're writing on the back of a napkin when I get a Word document. It just feels so unprofessional to me. And I used to think that I was like kind of anal about that until I started talking to other managers and they were like, oh my God, please PDF. And it's just obnoxious. It's so much easier for me to read PDF after PDF than switching PDF, Word doc, PDF, Word doc. So keep it a PDF. Every word processor now can export to a PDF. And if it can't, Google Docs is free and does save as a PDF. So those are 10 really important tips that you should have no excuse for. All 10 of those, no excuse. The next 10 tips that I have for you are what I call if possible. And it's not to say that these are less important. It's just to say that, if I don't put these in a different category, people say, well, I couldn't because these aren't always possible, but you should see them as just as important when possible. So what do I mean by that? Well, sometimes I tell people, send me your resume. There's no job description, right? So if I tell you like this number one tip for this section, reread the job description and then reread it again. So you've read it 3 times before you send in your application. you want to make sure, you know, a lot of times I'm so guilty of this. I scan things and I misread something. And if I don't reread it, I might miss something really important. So reread it, check it twice, you know, be like Santa Claus, right? Make sure you're responding to the right job. Um, you know, but on that note, I just want to pause here and say, a lot of times, and I try not to do this when I post a job, but most employers do, is they will put under requirements, their dream applicant, right? So they'll say, you know, required or you should have, and then they'll list every requirement that it would be nice if you had, right? And they're like building their perfect dream candidate. No one will meet all of those criteria. And that's the biggest secret in applying for a job, is that almost always job applicants will read that that impossible set of criteria and say, well crap, I can't, you know, I don't meet 3 of those 10 criteria. If you meet 7 of those criteria, you're amazing. Put in your application. So don't be afraid. That's another tip I don't have in here, but that should be the headline here. Don't be afraid. Apply to jobs that you don't think you're perfectly qualified for. And it's easy to, you know, it's easy to learn things. It's easy to pick up new skills. So if you meet 7 of those 10, the other 3 you can learn, or maybe you don't even need once you get on the job. Maybe they're saying, you know, we really need somebody who knows AWS, and you're like, crap, I don't know AWS, but I know Google Cloud. And you get there and you're like, you know, I don't know AWS, but I'm really experienced with Google Cloud. And they're like, oh, that's great. We're actually thinking of transitioning to Google Cloud. And you're like, hallelujah, good choice. I want to work here because you guys are smart. Like I said, opinionated, right? So make sure you reread this job description and target your application to it, right? And one of the most important things to include when you can, that's why this is if possible, is a short, directed cover letter. You do not do this from a form. You do not copy and paste from your last one. You write it fresh for every job. And here's why. It's only 3 sentences long. That's it. 5 sentences if you absolutely need to say something else. But basically, there's 3 sentences to this, right? Nikki, I love Palm Beach Tech. I think it's an incredible organization, period. I love what you guys are doing in building the Palm Beach Tech community, period. Here's why I think I would be a great fit there, because I do da 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 da, period. Sincerely, Todd. 3 sentences. I love your company. I love what you're doing. Here's why I'm a good fit. You can't copy and paste that from the last job because it's a different company. You're a good fit for a different reason. You love what they're doing for a different reason. So always make sure short, directed cover letter if you can. Right? So I see there's a question for Miguel. What would you say is most appropriate? Write about daily activities in the job or specific accomplishments? Good question, Miguel. We're going to get there, so bear with me a second. But the answer is basically neither of those. Okay? Is don't put a lot of crap on your resume, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. If you can, you know, again, that's this section. If you can tailor your resume to the job. So you reread the job description a bunch of times. Now go into your resume if you can and maybe tweak it and say, oh, well, you know, they're looking for this. Let me bold that or highlight that and make that stand out because I've done that and that's what they're looking for. I'll give you an example. A few years back when I was transitioning from academia to software development, I had 2 versions of my resume. I was still applying to some academic positions. I ended up teaching at UM for a little while. And I was also applying for, you know, jobs in the tech sector. I had 2 different resumes for those. One emphasized my academic achievements and one emphasized my accomplishments in the tech world, a lot of which were while I was an academic, right? You know, wrote software models for NASA versus, you know, published articles about my research with NASA, right? 2 different ways of putting the same thing, but tailoring it specifically to the job you're looking for. I get a lot of questions. People ask, like, should I include my address on the resume? If you're local, then you should, right? If you're applying to a job at Boca Code and you live in Deerfield or Del Rey, right, the next town's over, or Parkland, or you live down the street in Boca, put your address. Let me know, like, hey, I'm right down the street. But if you live in, Wenatchee, Washington, and you're looking to relocate, maybe drop a fourth line in that email saying, I'm moving to South Florida in the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to be I'm really eager to interview, right? And that's another tip. Always speak when in your writing and in your interviewing too. Always speak as though you are going to get the job. You are going to get the interview. When I come in for an interview, I'm going to tell you about XYZ. That it's like a subconscious kind of social hack where you're putting into their mind like, oh, this person is coming in for an interview. And most people can see through it, but it's still, it's so much more confident sounding than, well, if you interview me, maybe I can tell you this cool story I once, happened to me. It's so much more confident to say, listen, when you interview me, I'm coming in, I'm going to tell you this awesome story. Exude confidence, know that you're going to get the job, know that they want to hire you, know they want to interview you, and speak in that tone. It's so much more confident sounding and so much more likely that you'll actually get the interview or the job. If you can, name drop. If you're the proud peacock with all the beautiful feathers, show them off once in a while. Your resume is a place to try and sell yourself, right? Maybe you're not the most braggadocious person in the world, but in your resume, that's the place to do it. Well, I once worked for Google and da 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 da. This is the time, right? This is the time to say, while I was at, Zimmerman, I worked for Nissan, on the Nissan account, right? Or while I was working at Nebular, we did projects for Ally Bank and Jeep and Chrysler, right? Don't force this, right? But if you can, if you have those opportunities, then, name drop, maybe in your cover letter, maybe in your resume. If it's a little more of a stretch, then wait till the interview. But don't make shit up, right? Only if it's relevant, which is what my next point is, right? Only put relevant experience. So why do I put bowling balls here? When I was in high school, I worked for a week at a bowling alley, got fired. It was the only one of the few jobs I've ever gotten fired from. I worked there for a week. They told me I was too slow. Only times I've ever gotten fired from jobs, they said I was too slow. Because they wanted you to run down the aisle and fix a pin that was stuck in the gutter and run back down that little narrow strip. And, it was in high school. So, I was not, in probably the most soberest of minds to be running down a narrow strip on a bowling alley. That experience that I had in high school is not relevant to my career in tech. Now, if I'm 20 years old and I've only had 3 jobs, those are the 3 I list on my resume. I am not 20 years old anymore. I've had a number of jobs. I only list the most recent and most relevant on my resume. So those old ones fall off. I'm a big fan of How I Met Your Mother, and there's a whole episode on this where they all take off lines on their resume. Lily, could eat 33 hot dogs in a row, in 8 minutes, and Marshall can, won a slam dunk contest, and, there's silly little things. Sometimes those are good because they humanize you, right? But sometimes, it's time to take them off because they're not relevant anymore. What is relevant is if you're a developer, maybe you want to put a link to your GitHub or some other code portfolio. Or if you're a designer, or UX, maybe you have an online portfolio. But don't link to it if what you have there is dated or doesn't look good, right? So I actually pointed out the last time that, somebody asked me, well, I commit to GitHub all the time, but it's on private GitHub repos for my job. that are not public, so it doesn't show. There's a way in your stats where you could say to show private repos, and all of a sudden, you go from having like no commits last year to having commits every day last year, just by showing the private commits. So, make sure you keep your GitHub, if you're a developer, looking good, or if you have some other portfolio. There's a joke, and I think this goes in pretty much any career, whether you're a designer, developer, anything. Your own personal portfolio usually only looks good when you're unemployed, right? When you're bored, what do? You work on your portfolio, right? Then you get job after job after job after job, and years later you look back and your portfolio still looks like it did 5 years ago. That's great, right? But I'm no longer putting that portfolio on my resume, if it's dated like that. So, keep that in mind. Only put your portfolio if it looks good. As I was kind of alluding to a moment ago, maybe include a fun personal fact, something to humanize you, like you did win a hot dog eating contest. I used to put on my resume that I won a disc golf tournament, just because people don't, they want to know, like, oh, you're not just a robot. You actually like go out and do fun things. This can be kind of iffy, if you're looking for something to add, then add it. But it also depends on where you're applying. So for example, I was applying a few years ago. There was a senior developer position for Delivery Dudes, who are in Delray Beach. Delivery Dudes headquarters is in Delray, and something in the job description talked about, frisbee or hacky sack in the off, like must have skills. Hacky sack was listed as one of them, and so in my cover letter, I talked about my hacky sack skills, and in my resume I put, when I won a disc golf tournament, back 15 years ago, to humanize me, to make them, sound like, well, I'm not just a, nerdy computer guy, but I could fit into the company culture. So you got to feel out what the company culture is. And if you want to put something kind of clever or funny, bless you, Monica, if you want to put something funny or clever in there, maybe if it fits the company culture, do it. I just sent my resume to the Department of Education, government agency. I didn't put anything about a disc golf tournament in there, right? It's just serious business. So really depends on what your goals are and what the company culture is. One last, number 9 on these is not relevant to most people, but if it's relevant to you, make sure you do this. If you have a long gap in your job history, make sure to have an explanation, because somebody's going to ask. I went to a job fair once where we were doing like the speed dating, where candidates would come up to me for 10 minutes, and I had their resume ahead of time, and I interviewed somebody who had a 4.5 year or 5 year gap in her job history, and I was really curious. So I asked, right? Very reasonable question. I asked what happened, and she really didn't have a good answer for me. And she kind of brushed off the question, like, oh yeah, I know it's, and there wasn't an explanation. And it turns out she could have, I come years later, I came to find out where she actually was and what she was doing at that time. But it could have made for intrigue. It could have made a really good way for her to weasel her way into a second interview. She could have said, oh yeah, I was working during that time, paying taxes. But it wasn't, the job that I had is not something I feel comfortable putting on my resume. But at my second interview, I'll tell you more about it. Whoa, how do I not bring her in for a second interview now, right? She just totally intrigued me. Oh my God, I got to bring you in for a second interview. I'm so curious now. I want to hear more, right? As opposed to what she did, which was just kind of like, and play with her feet under the table and not give me an answer. So, have an answer. Maybe you were, touring up and down the California highway following some hippie band, Okay, you know, people do that, you know. Oh, you were backpacking in Europe. Great. That's cool experience that you're bringing to my company, right? You're well traveled, or, you know, you got that out of your system and now you want to come back and like contribute to the world in a different way. That's great. Okay. It's understandable, but explain it, you know, and have a reason to, you know, and you don't have to go into details. You know, I was taking care of a family member who was sick. You don't have to go into the whole sob story. Oh, my mom died of cancer, and just, I was taking care of a family member that was sick. Okay, great. You know, so you're a family person. That's great values. I like that. So just, you know, I know I'm spending a lot of time on something that is only relevant to a few people, but I just want to make sure this is really important for those few people that have those gaps. And finally, this one, which is kind of silly, you know, on the last one, I said, name your resume, or save your resume as a PDF, but also name it uniquely, right? So I don't use my last name very much. I go by Todd. Some of my students would call me Dr. Todd, but I don't use my last name much. But on a resume, I put it Albert resume.pdf, right? Or Albert resume 2020.pdf, right? But I didn't want to go on to a second line. You know, save your PDF with a name where it's not going to get mixed up with all the others, and I could find it easily if I have them all saved to a folder. All right, so now let's go on to the sections of your resume. At the top, you have name and contact info, right where I can find it. I've seen some people will put like email and phone number at the top, and then at the bottom in the footer put their address. Fine, okay, but name and phone number at the top. Name, phone number, email, quickest, easiest way to contact you, right at the top. Whose resume is this? That's the title. That goes at the top. And then the next two sections should be your professional experience and your education. What order you put those in is what's most relevant. So if you've been working in the tech field for the last couple of years or more, then that experience is the most relevant, your jobs in the tech industry. If you just finished code school, or you just graduated from college and you studied, you know, you studied software development or studied whatever is relevant in your field that you're applying for, then put your education first. So, you know, you're going to have education first, and then you'll have like odd jobs you did in high school and through college, right? I worked at the drugstore and, you know, sold drugs for Aunt Tilly or whatever. You know, that comes second. But, you know, so I always say whichever is most relevant you put first, but these are the first two sections almost undoubtedly, right? And this orange part is what I'm looking for when I pick up your resume and look at it for 10 seconds, right? I'm going to look at it. I'm going to see, you know, Nikki, here's where she went to school. Here's her jobs. Okay. Am I interested? If I'm interested, I'm going to read further. I'm going to read in more depth. But in a couple of seconds, I should be able to know, where have you worked and where'd you go to school? What did you study, right? So what relevant experience do you have, either education or work experience, right? Then you have other sections. And, you know, for me, on my resume, I have awards and publications, but I come from an academic background. Not many people are going to have publications. So for that, you know, you could, maybe you put skills, right? I see a lot of people list that, and there's a really good reason to do this, right? To put skills, you know, Node.js, JavaScript, React, you know, Framer, Figma, whatever, you know, if you're UX, just keywords, right? And, or languages that you speak, right? I'm fluent in Portuguese, Spanish, and speak some English, you know, whatever. So those are other things you can have there. Recognitions you've gotten, you know, think about it. You'll be surprised. A lot of us have stuff to put here, but don't fill this with fluff. Okay, no fluff. That's number one, most important, right? However, now I'll go on to so there, I've broken this talk up into like sections. So the first was, your goal is to get the interview. The second was my important tips. The third was other tips if you can. The fourth was the section. And the fifth is, how do you how do you make your resume attractive to a recruiter or to a bot? And why do I say a recruiter? Well, recruiters now almost inevitably put your resume through a computer software and you go into a database. But you know, in the older day of resume write or of recruiting, they would look and they would see like, okay, this job requires JavaScript and React, and if they don't see the words JavaScript on your and React on your resume, they don't know if you're a good fit. They assume you're not. So for a recruiter or for a bot, they're looking for those keywords. They're looking for Node, they're looking for React, Python, whatever it is that they're looking for. So in this regard, you want to put, you know, certain keywords in for them to see. Whereas for me, a human, right, a manager looking at your resume, if I see that you were a front-end developer at such and such place, I now have a question to ask you. I now have a reason to get in touch with you. I now have a reason to interview you. Hey, while you were a front-end developer at blah, 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 did you do any React? And that's when you can answer. No, I didn't, but I've been studying React and I have this side project going on, da, 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 da. And you can sell yourself, right? Whereas, you know, so for a bot, you want to have those keywords on there, but for a hiring manager, you want to keep things quick and concise, right? So I'm going to show you examples of what looks good to a bot or a recruiter, what looks good to a hiring manager, and how you can hopefully please both, right? So that's the idea, right? You want to be able to please both, or just have two versions of your resume, the one that you submit to, you know, the online, where, you know, to indeed.com and you give to recruiters and whatever, and the one that you actually send when you apply directly to a hiring manager. So this is actually a snapshot of a resume of a buddy of mine. He actually just got a job at City Furniture, so that's not on here. But you know, this is a slightly older version of my buddy Kevin's resume. And this is what it looked like when he sent it to me. And I just asked him one day, I was like, hey, send me over your resume. I wanted him to do some data analytics stuff for me. And one of the things, you know, this is good for a bot. A bot will actually read through this and pick up keywords like Oracle. Can you guys see my cursor? Yeah, okay. So they'll see keywords like Oracle, like SQL, right? Python, right? A bot will skim through and see those keywords. And if it's looking for Python and Oracle and SQL and maybe Redshift, it will see those. But you know what a manager sees when they look at this is a big block of gray, right? I just see a big block. What I see is PGA, data engineer, 6 months. Modernizing medicine, data engineer, 1 year, right? Iron hack, TA for, you know, half a year. That's what I see when I see, and all this stuff is just gray noise to me. I don't look at that. In fact, we actually call these sections, you know, even your mom won't read these, right? You send this resume to your mom and she's like, oh, sweetie, that looks so good. Did you read it? No. Unless you ask, hey, can you read this and check for grammar? No one is going to read those sections except a bot, and a bot is just scraping for keywords. So why even put all of that in there, right? This is what I see when I look at that resume, right? This is all I care to see, okay? But how do you please both, right? And that is this. This is how you please both. You put the single line like I had, and then you put the keywords: Python, data analytics, machine learning. You know how hard I had to look to find these in that paragraph? SQL, Oracle, and Redshift, right? R, AWS, Apache Airflow, JavaScript, data tracking. These are all keywords that if you look hard enough, you can find in here. But no one's going to take the time, unless you're a robot, no one's going to take the time to read this. So don't put these sections on, okay? Even your mom won't read those. But this is a really sexy way for your resume where I can skim down and see PGA, modernizing medicine, and Iron Hack, because those are aligned, they're bold, they stand out. I can see data engineer, teaching assistant, right? Those stand out because they're italics. The dates are clear and easy to read. And then I can ignore these keywords or zoom in on them if I want, right? If I'm looking for a data engineer, boom, data engineer, those stand out to me. If I'm looking at somebody who's had some relevant experience, PGA, modernizing medicine, Iron Hack, great companies, 3 companies I highly respect, right? And then if I want to get into the details, I could see, oh yeah, good, he knows some Python, right? And JavaScript, perfect. Those are the 2 things I'm looking for in my data engineer. So you see how easy this is versus just that globs of text. So I highly recommend doing this, making it easy, or alternatively, take all of these blue words here and drop them into skills, Python, data analytics, machine learning, SQL, right? And just bullet them out. And I could find them there. I don't have to know what you did where. I don't have to know that, you did R at modernizing medicine, but I want to know, R, right? So we have a question from LinkedIn. He says, he wants to know about changing or creating a movement about another way to present. Like, why do you need Indeed to explain gaps? Okay, yeah. So Marcio is asking, if the market is strong enough, then why would you need to explain like gaps? It's not that you can't get a job. It's that, it depends on your position, right? So Marcio has, 25 years plus of executive business experience, right? At that level, there's very little competition. They either want you or they don't. At the junior developer level, there's 1,000 junior developers in South Florida that apply for every job that you post. So if I get 600 resumes for a job, yours needs to stand out. And it's not that you can't have a gap in your resume. It's just, Marcio, that you need to be able to explain it. Especially if you're younger, right? So the young woman that I was talking about, she was maybe 25 years old and had like, a job when she was 18, 19, and then nothing from 20 to 25. And then, and then she went to code school and wanted a job as a developer. So it was like, well, what were you doing in those 5 years? And like I said, if she was, oh, I was smoking pot and touring with the Grateful Dead. Cool. I love the Dead, tell me what you were doing. And you don't have to get personal with it. You don't have to go into details, but it's really good to. But again, also, Marcio, a lot of these tips are geared more towards people with less experience, because, the people with experience like you, when you have 25 plus years and a long job history, it's a lot easier to sell yourself. When you've only had 1 or 2 jobs, or very little, it's a lot harder. So hopefully that answered your question.
Todd, sorry to interrupt. We actually had another question come through in the private chat along the same lines. Somebody had asked, and this may be more towards the actual interview, but somebody had asked, what about having a gap in your history that a manager would worry that you would do it again? Like if you're going back to school, or say you're a stay-at-home mom with your first kid, what happens if you have another kid? Is that going to happen again? Just kind of where you may, like, how do you explain that away, I guess, or should you, or, that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and in Europe, they have such a different mentality towards that, right? In fact, there was something that just really stood out to me. The European Union had a contest for like the Young Scientist Award, right? And I was looking into, as a young scientist at the time, I was looking into this award, and it was really interesting because you had to be under 35 years old, but then they allowed for 2.5 years extra for every child you had, because their idea was no matter your gender, that when you have a child for 2.5 years, your career is going to be, not at full throttle. So for myself, who had 2 children, I was allowed to apply for this young scientist award up until age 40. And so in Europe, they're a lot more forgiving on taking breaks to raise children. And so why am I bringing up Europe? The idea is that the company culture will dictate how important that is, right? So if, one company might say, oh, wow, that's great. You got to take time off to be with your kid. That's amazing, right? And they might really respect that. Whereas at another company, like if you're a investment banker on Wall Street in New York, they're like, what's a child? What is that? And have you took time off from work? Like what, what, if you're in that world, you're 9 months pregnant, when you go into labor, you have the doctors come to you and you give birth and then you're right back at work. So it really depends on the culture. And personally, I would prefer to work at a company where they didn't frown upon that gap in my job history, as opposed to one that did. So it really depends on the type of job you're going for, the type of culture you're looking for, and the rapport that you have with the hiring manager. So one thing you can do is, if you're trying to assess that, right, you're applying for a job and you did take time off to raise your children, you could say, oh, well, during that time, I was dealing with some, you know, um, family issues, right? Some personal family issues. So and they're not allowed legally to ask it for any more detail than that, right? And you don't have to. But as you get to know them and you got to talk to them and you start, and all of a sudden the manager says, oh yeah, I took off 2 years when, after I had my first child and it was so great, then it opens up like, yeah, actually that, that 2.5 years that I was out, it was to raise my first child, so you could maybe wait for them to open that door a little bit. But legally they're not really allowed to ask you personal stuff, but they can ask about gaps in your job history. They can ask things, this section, your professional experience and your education, those are all fair game. They can ask you all the questions in the world about those things. So yeah. Let's see, Miguel is also asking if I would recommend coding courses that would help fill requirements, or recent projects, right? So the answer is yes, Miguel, of course. Some hiring managers, like if you do a personal project, they're like, okay, great, another personal project that you did. It's not as impressive as professional experience where you were hired to do that. But but courses definitely, whether it's something, a $5 course on Udemy or even a boot camp, we're just a little plug for Boca Code. In 2 weeks, we're starting a 1 week boot camp level up course on JavaScript. So there's 2 of them back to back. The first one is intro to JavaScript and Node. So it's more backends type stuff and programming. And then the second week is React. So, if maybe you went through and learned Python, or learned PHP or learned Ruby, and now you really want to learn JavaScript, those, in 2 weeks, you can get full stack JavaScript, or you can take one of those weeks and, and fill in some gaps. But yeah, I mean, make sure that, if you're taking those courses, that you're taking the right ones, and that, you have the right instructional staff and so forth. So, all right, back to resumes for a minute, unless, if anybody has any other questions. So this is my resume, and, I have years and years and years of experience. So, don't don't think that your resume needs to look exactly like this. But oh, whoops, sorry. So, at the top, you have your latest contact info, and I have it grayed out just because, we're live on the internet. If you need me, bocacode.com. But that's where you find it, right at the top, full name, full contact info, really easy to find. Then you have your experience and your education. And again, flip these if you're a recent grad, right? If you just graduated or just went, or if you just changed careers, like Gus was talking about changing careers. So, Gus, your professional experience might be less relevant than if you like attend a code school recently. That education, like, oh, Gus just attended a code school, oh, and he used to work in this field and had all these jobs. So, keep in mind which is more relevant, which do I want to see first. But don't make me search for either of these. I've literally gotten resumes that were like 6 pages long, and the education was the last section on the 6th page. And that's what I wanted to see. I'm like, it's all this crap. Well, where did they go to school? And I had to flip to page 6 to find that. And I was like, are you kidding me? Don't hide it. And it's totally cool to put in here, from 2019 to 2020, I took, 480 hours of courses on Udemy, right? Awesome. Tell me, how did you learn to code? It didn't magically appear in your brain. So, keep that in mind. And then I have, awards, recognitions, things like that. Oftentimes, if you really think about it, you can think about times where you've been recognized or awarded for something, and pop that here. It's not required, but it's nice to say like, hey, this person was the best at something or was recognized for something. So it's good to have. Like I said, I have publications here, but you could put, skills, languages, whatever. But notice what's missing, right, is a bunch of fluff. And, of course, I have a very dense resume here, but it doesn't have those, wordy blocks of text that, even your mom won't read, right? I don't think most people in the tech world are going to read through my list of publications here. It's more like they're going to see, oh, wow, he's been published a bunch of times and it only says selected. So this isn't even all of them. And they're going to see grants. And you might not read through all my grants and awards, but you see like, oh, this person's been recognized. So it's not even so much what it says. It's just that like, hey, there's some stuff there, right? But the education and the experience, the hiring manager will look at those sections. They will see, at least zip down here and look at the names of the companies, see if there's any big gaps, make sure you've held jobs for more than, a couple of months at a time, right? So, you could see 3 years here, 3 years here, 3 years here, 4 years here, 3 years here. That's something that managers look for, right? And then, relevant education, right? So as I said, consider adding like languages that you speak, especially in South Florida. This can be relevant, right? A lot of developers speak Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, so it's good to know. And then again, listing out your skills, right? React or, Angular or whatever. So that's what I have, and I'm happy to answer some more questions if you guys do. Otherwise, please check us out, bocacode.com, join our Slack. Also plug for a really, really great resource, not only is our Slack channel, but the Palm Beach Tech Slack channel, palmbeachtech.org/Slack. So even though Nikki already gave her little plug for Palm Beach Tech, I always in my talks tell people, go to palmbeachtech.org/Slack, join that Slack channel if you're not there already, because it's a great community. The Boca Code Slack is a great community. There's jobs posted on both of these, people willing to help out. Also Palm Beach Tech, submit your resume and it goes out to like a gazillion people. I think it's now up to like a gazillion and 4. And there's also constantly jobs posted there as well. So really great career resource.
Thank you,
So
Todd.
my pleasure.
We actually have, I don't know if anybody else on here has any calls. You're welcome to take yourself off mute. I actually have a couple questions that were in private chat. This one says technical versus non-technical resumes. How technical should you make your resume? If the IT leader is reading it, they're going to view it one way than if a non-technical HR or internal recruiter is. Should I have two resumes? And if so, which one do I submit?
Great question. And I'm hoping that question came earlier on in the talk, because I feel like
It
you know,
did, yes.
that kind of gets to the, like, you know, do you want to please the bot, you know, and the recruiter versus please the hiring manager? You know, the non-technical HR person wants to see, like, you know, have they been able to hold a job for a few years, right? Have they, you know, do they have the relevant educational background, etc. Whereas, you know, the CTO of the company might, you know, is going to want to see, like, well, I don't care where they went to school, but do they know, you know, do they know Python, and do they know, you know, Node, or whatever the relevant, you know, technical skills are. So if you try and marry those two, where, like, listing the skills, if you list the skills out in a separate section, then, you know, the hiring manager can look through, see your professional experience and your education. That's all they care about. They're going to look at those two sections. They're going to say, hey, this person looks good. They're going to hand it off to the, you know, to the CTO, who's going to take it and be like, oh wow, React, Node, Python, perfect. This person, you know, AWS, oh my gosh, this person looks great. So I think that's the best answer I can give, is those resumes seem to please everyone.
I agree. That's good. I've got another one here. Says, basically, is it a disadvantage if you've worked for the same company for multiple years? She puts like 10 years. Because I know sometimes people do view that, you know, you're not moving up or gaining new skills, trying to, you know, work for a different company. But it says trying to grow in reclassification or promotions with new responsibilities over time. Yeah, so does that question make sense, or should I read exactly? It's a little bit longer.
No, absolutely. And I think in a way, there's a couple of different questions in there. So in one way, you know, on one hand, having a long history with a single company shows longevity. It shows your ability to, you know, to stay with a company for a long time. I know developers that are extraordinarily gifted developers, that you look at their resume and they've never been at a company for more than a year. And, you know, when you look at that, you wonder, like, do they get bored, or are they not able to hold a job, right? And it makes you wonder. So having that longevity can be really good. I mean, think about a relationship, right? If you're a manager and you're looking to hire somebody, it's almost like dating, right? And do you want to know that, you know, the person that you're going to be dating, hopefully for a long time, has had a bunch of one night stands, or that they were in, you know, these long-term relationships? So it might not seem like it, but holding a job for a long time is like a long-term relationship. It's saying, look, I can get along with people that I work with for a long period of time. As far as moving around in the company, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You want to show that you've had upward mobility in the company, but at the same token, what I've seen, I hired somebody who I unfortunately found out his upward mobility in his former company was because they couldn't stand him in one department. So they pushed him into another department, who couldn't stand him. So they pushed him into another, and they just kept pushing him around until finally he left. But, you know, they didn't want to fire him, but they just kept pushing him off to other people. And so what I recommend, and what I think is the consensus out there, is only, you know, put how long you worked at the company, right? So put all 10 years, the name of the company, and then your most recent position, your you know, your highest or most recent or relevant position. So, if you made it up to, VP of development or whatever that is, great, put that. You don't have to say started here, went to here, went to here, went to here. Now I'm here. Just say I've been with the company for 10 years. Here's my position, like on a business card, right? Your business card doesn't say was in the mailroom, then got promoted, and now I'm the vice president. It just says I'm the vice president, right? They don't need to know where in the company you started, just what's your position now. So, and then, but again, I just also want to say it is also, the longevity of the company is also a little bit of a double-edged sword as well. I come as you guys know, I come from an academic background. When I was doing my bachelor's degree and decided I wanted to go on to a master's and a PhD, most people tell you do it at 3 different universities so you can really learn from 3 different sets of people. And that was the mindset I got in from one of my professors. And then I told him, yeah, I'm applying to grad school here. He's like, wait, you're not staying with me? I'm like, no, you told me to go learn from other people. And he's like, yeah, but I want you to stay with me. And I'm like, I'm confused. He's like, well, for him, the best thing was for me to stay because he wanted me as a student. But for me, the best thing was to go. So he's like, I want you to stay, but you should go. And, so there is an advantage to learning from different people. And then I did do my master's and PhD at different schools. And then looked back and said, wow, that would have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars less if I stayed at one school or 2 and not did it at 4, which is what I ended up doing. I learned a whole lot, but it took longer and, took longer to get there. So, again, sorry, it's kind of a bit of a non-answer, but I think, longevity is good overall. Longevity shows, the ability to stay with something for a long time and not piss people off.
Yeah. The last question I have, kind of along the same lines, but it's actually the opposite. And I think this question may actually go with a comment that Miguel made earlier was, let's see, what if you have had a lot of contractor positions? Do you put every single job on your resume? Some companies may view you as a job hopper when you're really not, because you're a career contractor.
Right.
How do you
Right.
combat the bias against contracted jobs versus permanent?
Simple solution to that, right? You put the date range that you did all of that contract work, and you put freelance developer or freelance whatever, and then you can put, contracts included, this company, this company, this company, if you want to name drop, right? It's, if you don't put the name drops there, then, it's like, before I met my wife, I did a lot of online dating, and a lot of my friends would tell me, like, if you put that you're self-employed or an entrepreneur, that means you're unemployed, right? You sit on your couch all day, right? It could be that perception, right? So, if I tell you I'm an entrepreneur, one person might be like, oh, wow, he's a business owner, he's successful. Another person might be like, entrepreneur, yeah, he sits at home in his underwear and doesn't do shit. So, you have to be careful using the term freelance, but it allows you to take a bunch of jobs and collapse them into a single line that shows some longevity. And honestly, like, if I look at that, there's 2 ways of interpreting it. If you did freelance for 5-6 years, that's impressive. Not a lot of people can go out on their own for that long, right? But, if you were living on your mom's couch during that time and you were making, $8,000 a year, it's a whole lot less impressive. So if there's any way under that line, you could show me, like, I was successful somehow, by like listing out some of the companies, that's a way I think you can take those 10 lines on the resume, put it into one really solid line.
Great answer, Todd, like normal.
I try.
We are actually just over time, so unless anybody's got any last minute questions, which we'll send out a follow-up email as well if anybody wants to reach out to Todd or Jen directly. But I think that's all we've got so far. I tried to check all the questions.
Yeah, and I'm on Palm Beach Tech Slack and Boca Code Slack, so feel free to reach out to me, send me your resume to look over if you want, or just, hit me up with more questions personally, or, through Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever.
Perfect.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you so much, Todd. Always appreciate it. Always educational.
Yeah,
You guys
thanks,
rock.
Todd. Great. Nikki, we should
Thanks.
do Todd Tip Tuesdays from now on.
I know, right? Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate it. And hopefully everybody got a lot from this today.
Thanks all.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.